Hey, what's up, guys? This is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, and I'm here with our DraftKings Friday NBA picks for February 26th. There's a pretty nice 8-game slate going on. A couple games with some pretty decent spreads. A couple games with some pretty decent totals. Not too many spreads that really have me thinking there's going to be a lot of blowouts today. So I do think almost all of these games are in play, and there's quite a few guys that we can look at. There's a few guys that stick out to me today, all pretty much in that mid-range price tag of 5K to 7K. So let's call up the slideshow and talk about some of the guys who we're going to be looking at for our rosters today. The 4 guys who I'm going to talk about are Al Horford at 7,100, Rudy Gay at 6,500, Matt Barnes at 5,400, and JJ Redick at 5,100. The first guy up is going to be Al Horford at 7,100. His Hawks team is favored by 7 against the Chicago Bulls with a 208 total here. Paul Gasol is a pretty weak interior defender, so he's going to be matched up on Horford, and I think it's a pretty good spot for Horford to put up a pretty good game. Horford's main drag on his fantasy points this season has been the number of minutes he's playing. If you look over his game logs, you'll see when he plays 36 or more minutes, he's usually giving you 5x or better in the value range. When he plays less than that, it's usually the times that he underperforms, and it's also a reason why his price is so cheap. He's seen 38-plus minutes in 4 of his last 5 games, and in 3 of those 4, he's gone for 40 fantasy points or more. He's averaging over 42 fantasy points over those last 5 games, and he's coming off of games in his last 2 where he had 40 fantasy points and then a huge 60 fantasy point performance in his last one. At 7,100, if we can get 35 fantasy points out of Al Horford, that's going to be a pretty decent floor for him, and I think he's going to be able to go above that. 40 fantasy points is really what we need in order to get him closer to, about 42 is what we need to give him his 6x upside, and I think there's a really good chance that he can get you 40-plus fantasy points today, which would make him a great upside play at only 7,100. The next guy I'm going to talk about is Rudy Gay, who's down to 6,500. He plays in the highest total game on the day against the LA Clippers at 218, and the Clippers have struggled to guard wing players for, the better part of the last couple of years, to be honest. Gay is really cheap as he's coming off of a bad game against the Spurs, but remember, small forwards going up against the Spurs, that means he saw some Kawhi Leonard defense. So the Spurs being a great defensive team and Gay having probably the toughest matchup on the floor, allows me to excuse that game. His price is also cheap because he got injured in one game where he only had like 3 or 4 fantasy points before going out injured and then missing the next game. And then he didn't play his full allotment of minutes in the first game that he came back after that injury. So in the last 7 or 8 games, he's had a couple bad games out there that has forced his price to come down to a point where, I think there's a lot of upside for him at a price of only 6,500. He had 36, 36, and 49 fantasy points in the 3 previous games before that Spurs game last time out where he struggled. And he really only needs about 32 points to get value for you and 39 points to get GPP upside. In a high-paced, high-total game against the Clippers here with the biggest total on the day, I do think we're going to be able to see 35 to 40 fantasy points out of Rudy Gay. And if he gets that for us, he's going to be one of the better upside plays at the small forward position. And he's also a guy who can give you a 50-point upside for only 6,500, which is pretty cheap for a guy that has that kind of upside when he's having a good game. The next guy I want to talk about is Matt Barnes. He's got a great matchup against a very bad LA Lakers defense. Memphis just beat LA on Wednesday in a game that saw 247 total points scored. I think the final score was like 128 to 119 or something along those lines. Barnes has a much bigger offensive role now that they traded away Jeff Green and Marc Gasol got hurt. Now, Green was kind of taking some minutes away from Barnes, so the fact that he's gone is going to up Barnes' minutes as well. And then the fact that those 2 guys are both out of there means there's a lot of offensive usage that's open, and Barnes has been there soaking up some of it. He matched his season high in field goal attempts with 14 on his way to 39.6 fantasy points on Wednesday against this exact same Lakers team. He did have a pretty good game in there. I don't know if we see him get back up to 39 fantasy points, but if he can get us 32, that's going to be 6x value for us and a really good return for a guy who's only 5,400. Seems to be frozen here. Hold on a second. The last guy that we're going to talk about here is going to be JJ Redick. Let me see if I can get this back up. Well, basically the idea behind Redick, just so you guys know, and the reason why we like him today, he's in that same high total game against Sacramento where we're expecting 218 overall points. Now, the reason I like Redick is Sacramento has been one of the worst teams all season long at stopping the shooting guard position. Shooting guards have been doing a lot of scoring against Sacramento, which is basically what JJ Redick does in order to get most of his fantasy points. He's 5,100, where Jamal Crawford right now is 5,700. So you're getting a $600 discount by going down to JJ Redick. He has 25 and 30 fantasy points in his last 2 games, which would be a 5 and 6x return based off his price. And in the 2 games that they played already against each other this season, he had 30 fantasy points in the last one and 28 fantasy points in the game before that. He also had another game, I think it was either the first or second game of the season, where he only had like 17 or 18 fantasy points against them. So he hasn't been killing it every single time, but again, 30 and 28 in his last 2 would be 5.5 and 6x return on his price of only 5,100. So those are the 4 guys that I'm really looking at to have a lot of exposure to in my lineup. With those 4 guys, you're not really spending a lot of money either. You're looking at, let's see, 10, 5, 17. You're looking at about 24,000, which would give you about $26,000 left over to put the other 4 guys into your lineup to round it out. If all these guys can get us 5 or 6x, we're going to be in the 275 to 300 range on our roster. Probably have a really good chance to hit all our double ups, to win most of our 50-50s, and to be right there on the borderline of the cashes for GPPs, depending on how high a scoring of a day it is. Like I said, it also gives you about $2,600 to play with to fill out the last 4 spots. And that's a pretty good $6,500 per spot that you can go. So if you find one more guy at 5,000, you can go get a guy at 8,000. If you find a guy at 4 or 4,500, you can go and get one of those guys that's priced up in the $9,000 range today, and really have a chance to give yourself some serious upside and a roster that can take down one of these GPPs. So those are the 4 guys who I'm looking at to put into a lot of my rosters today. Thank you guys for joining us over here at rotocurve.com. And as always, stay classy, DFS.